Okay, so here we are. I'm going to show you how to mix up the dough to get it ready to bake tomorrow. So first thing is I'm going to grab my scale here, and you can do this either with a scale or with cups and teaspoons, things like that. Turn on my scale and then put my bowl on top, zero out the scale. Then we're going to do 500 grams of flour. And I just pour it in. Watch the numbers. 470. 497. 500. Oh, 501. That's okay. And then I will put in, the recipe calls for 10 grams of salt. I feel like that's a little bit salty, so I do more like 8 or 9 grams of salt, which is 2 teaspoons. And I should mention the flour was 3 1/3 cups. So 3 1/3 cups flour, 2 teaspoons salt. For me, that's 2 big pinches. Zero out my scale. 1, I will, 2. And maybe just a little bit more. Hi, are you helping? Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, and then we're going to add our water, which is about 1 1/3 cup, or 325 grams. So 100, 200. There it is, 320, oh, it went to 333. That'll be fine. If the dough is a little bit more moist, it's easier to work with, and because we're going to add flour into it tomorrow, after it's risen overnight, it'll be totally fine. So again, a little bit moister is better than too dry. Right, Willow. And then we're going to put in 75 grams of starter. Here's my starter, which was fed last night, and you can see that it's nice and bubbly and looks active. It smells like sourdough. Just a little bit sour, but it shouldn't be overly pungent. And 75 grams, which is about 1/3 of a cup. So here we go. You can see that beautiful consistency. 75. It went slightly over, that's 80 grams. Again, that little bit of extra moisture in there won't hurt anything. All right, now we're ready to mix it. So I'll move my scale out of the way. And something like a wooden spoon or rubber scraper is ideal for this. And I just start turning the dough over the mix, getting the water down to the bottom, getting the salt evenly distributed, and the starter mixed all through there. Turn and scrape, roll, press. I do a lot with pressing either the scraper or the spoon into the dough, because that helps sort of stick it all together. So scrape, roll, press. You can see it's already starting to come together into a ball. Working around. I'm not going to do any kneading, just mixing. Until I don't see any more dry flour. It's a little bit hiding in the bottom. We'll lift that up, press it in, scrape, scrape. Okay, take my spoon here, scrape that bit of dough off of here. I've used all sorts of things, metal spoons, wooden spoons. I've even used a rice paddle, works really well, plastic scraper, whatever you have on hand is just fine for this process. Just mixing it until it's all about the same consistency. The water that I use is slightly warm. I often use leftover water from my tea kettle from the day that's just a little bit warm to the touch. Room temperature is fine. If it's going to be rising for longer, you can use cold water, but I like it just slightly warm, about body temperature is really nice for your dough because you want to treat your starter well. It doesn't like to be too hot or too cold. It's kind of like a little kid likes to be just a very pleasant temperature. Okay, and that's all done. You can see that it's just come together into an even mass, but if I were to stick my fingers in there, it's super sticky. So I would have my hand covered with dough, and that's not what we want. And that's all that you have to do for the preparation of your dough. I just put a plate, or you can use some plastic wrap or an inverted bowl, just something to seal it pretty well. You don't want your dough to dry out at all overnight. The plate works well. And then I'll put it in the oven because it's a little bit warm in there, but I haven't warmed the oven or anything like that. And it can rise overnight. Okay, now I'll show you how I feed this starter. This is more starter than I need to be keeping right now. If I were going to be making another loaf of bread or some bagels or something like that, English muffins, I could use this starter, but I don't need that much. So I'm gonna throw this out. They call it the discard, and it's gonna go right into the trash here. And don't feel bad for it. I'm gonna reserve about a tablespoon of starter in there. Okay, and then all that I have to do to feed it is I take approximately equal parts flour and water, which for me, I know is about 2 of these scoops, or maybe 1.5. Something like that. So for me, this jar is about halfway full. And then I'll take some of my leftover water, pour it in. And then I can use my spoon and just begin mixing that. You can see there's already some bubbles forming. That starter culture is very active, and it's super excited that it's getting fed again. And every time you add flour to your dough, you're feeding your starter. If you have forgotten about your dough and it's risen all over the place and made a big mess, don't worry about it. You just work some more flour into it, start again, give it another hour, rise, something like that. It's hard to wreck once you realize that you can always start again by adding flour and maybe some water, feed that culture in there. And you can see this is perfect. It's like a thick pancake batter. And that's all it takes to feed your starter. And then I'll just wipe off my jar so it stays nice and clean and doesn't drip on the counter. And this jar lives on my counter because I'm baking pretty much every day. And so it can just sit there. If you're only baking, say, once a week, you might want to keep it in the refrigerator. Then it doesn't have to be fed so often. And that's it. Okay, see you tomorrow. So here we are the next morning, and you can see that my dough has risen quite a lot. And right now it would be very, very, very sticky. And so typically when people make bread dough, they punch it down, but this will just like envelop your hand and you'll be covered with sticky. So what I do, and this is sort of my own method because I don't like putting flour on the counter. because then you end up cleaning the counter twice, right? You have cleaned the counter to put your flour down, then you do your things, and then you have to clean the counter again. And not that I mind cleaning the counter, but if we don't have to, it's nice not to. Okay, so I get a handful of flour. I'm going to sprinkle a little on top, and then use just a plastic scraper. And I start sort of lifting the dough and sprinkling a little flour in there underneath it. And lift and sprinkle, scrape, lift, sprinkle. And I kind of press the bowl against me here so that it won't slide off the counter. Press, lift, sprinkle. There we go. We've got it mostly loosened from the sides of the bowl. So I've worked that whole handful of flour in there. And I'm going to start sort of turning, stretching. Just stretch it a little bit and press it. Roll it around. I've got a little stuck on the side, so I use my scraper to get that because I want all that dough. Good, and that flour is getting worked in there. And every time you work flour into the dough, you're essentially feeding that starter some more, so it'll rise some more on your next rise. Still have flour in my hand, and I'm gonna do a little more of that stretching, pressing, folding, working it around. A little more flour. Stretching, rolling it around. So that feels about right now. And you can see that it's kind of formed itself into a ball and is nice and soft and mixed together, but I haven't really kneaded it. I've just worked it some with my fingers. All right, next step is I'm going to grab some cornstarch here. Cornstarch. And then I have a bowl. This one happens to be a banaton basket, but you can use just a regular bowl and then a tea towel laid across it. And then you're going to put some cornstarch in there. Doesn't have to be very much, just maybe a couple teaspoons worth. And once you've done this a few times with the same towel, you won't have to do it so much. But I worked that cornstarch into the fibers of the fabric so that my dough won't stick. A lot of people use flour, but I've not had good luck with flour. My dough likes to stick to it, and then I have a mess. So cornstarch works really, really well. Okay, so that's all ready to go. And then I'm just gonna take my dough here, and I'm gonna turn it around, and I'm grabbing the edges with my thumb and sort of folding them down to the bottom so that I get a nice ball. Into the basket goes. You can see that the dough has stuck to my fingers a little bit. That's okay. I just use my scraper to release that. And we're all ready to go. That's all it takes. Then I'm just gonna put, this is a soup plate, but any kind of plate or bowl that will fit on top of your bowl works really well. And put that on there, save the plastic wrap. Washable, reusable, economical. I'm gonna do bread proof to start. If your oven doesn't have bread proof, just put it in a warm spot, or you can set your oven to like 100 degrees. Okay, just low. You want it to be warm. And then in this goes. I'll set my timer for 1 hour so I don't forget about it. And that's it. Then you should have beautiful, delicious, wonderful dough ready to bake in about an hour. See you then. Okay, so it's been about an hour on my proof. And so I'm gonna take out my bread in the oven. And I'm gonna put in my Dutch oven to start heating, because I'm gonna bake this bread in the Dutch oven. This is just a cast iron Dutch oven with nothing in it. And I heat both the Dutch oven and its lid. And we turn off the bread proof, turn on the oven to 450 degrees and start. And I'm going to leave this bread over here on the top of the stove, but not right in front of the vent, because I don't want it to get too hot, but I want it to stay nice and warm while this heats. And it'll take about 20 minutes to half an hour for the oven and Dutch oven to come up to temperature. Now, if you want to take a peek at how the dough is doing, you can see that it has already risen some, and it looks a little bit jiggly. And that's just how we want it to look. If I were to touch it again, it would be quite sticky on this side, but the other side is sitting in that cornstarch, in the tea towel or cloth, whatever you have, and so it won't stick when I take it out. So I'll just let this sit here and stay nice and warm on top of this stove for about, like I said, 20 minutes to a half an hour until everything has come up to temperature. Okay, see you then. Quack. So it's been about 25 minutes and we're ready to put the bread in the oven. There's a couple of ways to do this. The best is probably to take some parchment paper and you would uncover your dough, which you can see has continued to rise. And you'd lay that square of parchment paper over the dough, put a plate on it and invert it onto the paper. Then you can lift the paper and put it into your Dutch oven. At the moment, I'm actually out of parchment paper, so I'm going to show you how to do this without parchment paper. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to get out my Dutch oven. It's nice and hot. Up here so that you have a good workspace. Take the lid off. Now, some people say that you should heat the Dutch oven until it's smoking. I found that to be unnecessary, and it tends to maybe overcook the base of the bread a little bit, the bottom crust. So just as long as it's been about 20 minutes or so and your oven's up to temperature, your Dutch oven will be hot enough. I'm just going to dump this into the Dutch oven and see how it came right out of the cloth. There, and the bread's in the Dutch oven. It's slightly off center, but we're not going to worry about that because you'll see it'll kind of move itself. Put the lid back on, and then in it goes for half an hour. Timer, 30 minutes. Now, I had talked a little bit before about what to do if you've forgotten about your bread and it has over risen or something like that. Like I said, or if it's stuck to the fabric, all you have to do is use your scraper, get it off the fabric, work it a little bit more with some more flour until you have it back to the dough. Put it back in your bowl, or if you don't want to mess with the fabric and the cornstarch, you can use a ceramic bowl that has a little bit of oil in it. Roll the dough around in that oil, cover it, let it rise for an hour. You should be fine. You can pretty much always rescue the dough. The other thing is if something comes up and you're not going to be able to bake it for a while, cover it, put it in the refrigerator. You can come back to it later. It'll be just fine. Okay, so half an hour and then I'll see you for the next step. Okay, so our half hour is up and there's the timer. I'm going to show you this next step. It's the shortest step. So all we're going to do is take the lid off of the bread. And you can see the bread in there. It's risen and it has a really nice shape to it. And then I have a cookie sheet here that I'm going to put underneath the Dutch oven, and that helps keep the bottom of the bread from burning or getting too hot while it finishes up. So close the oven and give that 20 more minutes to finish baking. Now with your starter, if you have forgotten about your starter, or it's been a while since you've used it, and you open your jar and it has kind of separated out to where it's watery stuff on top and then floury stuff on the bottom, it's probably okay. All you want to do is stir that up so it gets remixed, and then dump it out as if you were doing a discard, refeed it, and let it sit on the counter for a day. I wouldn't put it back in the fridge right away, but let it sit out on the counter. Check it after a day, or even just after 4 to 6 hours. Check on it. If it's bubbly, you're good to go. If it isn't, then you can add a pinch of commercial yeast to it, and maybe a little more flour, a little more water. Stir it up, let it sit for another day or 6 hours, and you should start to see that starter coming back to life. So don't panic if you open it up and it looks funny one day. It's all rescuable. So I'll see you in 20 minutes when we take this bread out. Okay, so it's been 20 minutes and it's time to take your bread out and see how you did. This is the best part. Here it comes. Oh, it looks beautiful. All right. Turn off my oven. And let's take it out. Dutch oven. If it's stuck a little bit on the bottom, it's okay. You can just pull it up with your mitt, and you can see I have this beautiful loaf. It's not burned anywhere. If you like it a little more golden, you can leave it in for a couple more minutes, or even take it out of the Dutch oven and put it just on the rack in your oven for about 4 or 5 more minutes, and it'll brown up a little bit more. Now you can see that it's ripped here along the side, and I don't particularly mind that, but if you want to do some scoring, at the point when you put the bread dough into the Dutch oven, you can take a razor blade and put some little nicks or some little cuts in the top. You can do a long one, or you can do a couple smaller ones to make it look like leaves or something like that, and then you'll have a pretty pattern on the top of your bread. So it kind of depends on how complicated you want to make it, how fancy you want your bread to look, but it'll taste great just the same, no matter how you do it. So happy baking! 1 or 2 more things I wanted to share with you about my bread is that I use an all-purpose flour. It's organic and non-GMO, and I found that to work the best with the starter culture and in terms of my family feeling great all the time. And I've also found that this bread lasts really well. You don't have to particularly wrap it or keep it in the refrigerator. It has quite a bit of moisture in the crumb, so it keeps well, and you'll have a nice crisp crust at least for a day after baking it. And it's, you know, delicious on sandwiches and with soups or all kinds of different things. The sourness of it is not super sour. I've had some sourdoughs that were quite a distinctive flavor. This one I would say is sort of medium, so it has a nice bit of sourness and a good rich flavor, but it's not overly sour. And then lastly, sourdough is really good for you. It has all kinds of probiotics and things in it, and is very low on the glycemic index, often better than a lot of multigrain breads. So a good choice all the way around, and I hope that you really enjoy it. Take care.